IT is setting off a revolution in innovation, not just on one dimension, but on 4 dimensions simultaneously: measurement, experimentation, sharing, and replication. Each of these 4 practices is powerful in and of itself, and many companies succeed just by doing 1 or 2 of them well. But the real power comes when you combine them in a sequence, starting with experimentation, then careful measurement, followed by sharing of those results, of the successful results, and then replication and scaling up of the findings. Companies are changing the way innovation is done by using information technology much more intensively. Specifically, I've noticed 4 particular practices that are becoming pervasive in these leading edge companies. The first one is radically improved measurement. Use of what I call nanodata, that is clickstream data, Google Trends, detailed email data, the billions and trillions of bits of information that are thrown off by enterprise planning systems, even without any conscious effort on the part of the designers. This information is just generated. By studying these data very carefully, companies can have much better knowledge of their customers, of their business processes, of their product quality and defects, of their supply chains, and the field of business intelligence has been tapping into this explosion of data to take advantage of it and identify new types of innovations. A second category of IT-driven innovation is business experimentation. It's most obvious in companies like Amazon, which regularly conducts what they call A/B experiments, comparing different algorithms or different website formats. Google does on the order of 200 to 300 experiments on any given day. But it's also quite common in catalog companies like credit card companies, direct mail companies, and even mainstream companies like bricks and mortar companies like Harrah's. Gary Loveman has been a pioneer at bringing the experimental approach to the casino industry. The big advantage of the experimental approach is that you can get at causality in a way that you can't with just pure measurement and observation. And that, of course, is the gold standard for being able to have actionable knowledge about what's really happening in your business and what innovations are paying off and which ones aren't. A third thing that's changed a lot in businesses over the past 5 to 10 years is the way that companies can share not only data but insights. The internet and information technology is uniquely well designed for this kinds of sharing. In fact, the original purpose of the World Wide Web that Tim Berners-Lee invented was to get scientists to be able to share their experimental results more easily at CERN in Switzerland. Today, companies are using the web and related technologies to share innovations and business insights inside the company much more rapidly. This has dramatically sped up the way that a good idea can propagate to the rest of the company. One good example of this is what I saw at Cisco, where the central IS department did not support Macintosh computers. However, they have about 10,000 users of Macs. So what did the users do? Well, they set up their own wiki internally, and they shared tips and tricks on how to install new software into their Macs. In particular, one example that I remember was they shared advice on how to set up printers. They had Linux printers throughout Cisco, and the Mac Wiki allowed them to have their Macintosh computers work with those Linux printers. This spontaneous creation of a wiki was a good example of how not just big innovations, but even little innovations like using a printer more effectively can be easily shared through the infrastructure that the web enables. Although we often think of grand innovations like the invention of the light bulb as what's driving economic growth, it's important to understand that equally important, perhaps more important, are the 1,001 small innovations that regular business managers, line workers do every day at their jobs. And if we can find a more effective way of sharing those micro innovations with one another so that each person doesn't have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent the printer routine, then we're much more likely to be able to get a faster, more steady pace of economic growth and improve competitive advantage for the companies that make that easy. The fourth way that IT is driving innovation is that it's made it dramatically easier to replicate and scale up innovations once they've been identified. So each of the first three approaches help companies find and share new innovations. Once you have them in place, IT also makes it possible to take that idea and copy it many times. Now, the most obvious example is innovations that are made of bits, software, music, web pages. Those get replicated thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of times and have completely changed those industries. However, what we also see is that business processes themselves can be replicated by leveraging information technology. A nice example is what Andrew McAfee described at CVS. He did a case study of CVS and found that they implemented an improved business process for prescription drug ordering at one of their pharmacies. This improved customer satisfaction significantly. But what happened next is what's really important. They took that business process and they embedded it in an enterprise information technology system. And then they replicated it to 4,000 other pharmacies, 4,000 other stores, CVS stores. As a result, within a year, they took that improvement in performance from one location and amplified it, magnified it to 4,000 other locations. What we're seeing in, not just in retailing, but also in manufacturing, in banking, in industry after industry, is that successful companies are finding ways to take good ideas, embed them or leverage them with information technology, and replicate them to many other locations. Each time they do that, in effect, they multiply the effect, the power of that innovation 10, 100, 1,000-fold. Most companies have just been overwhelmed with the flood of data that's been created by their information systems, much of it, frankly, accidentally. When they install, say, a new enterprise resource planning system, billions of bits of information are generated about their operations, about their customers, about their suppliers, and most of it just gets stored and never used and looked at again. Gary Loveman describes his situation when he came to Harrah's as coming there and finding a gleaming new F-16 fighter, but with no pilot. Just all this wonderful data that had nobody really to steer it and take advantage of it. And I think that's more the norm than the exception at companies throughout the United States and throughout the world as they implement information systems. Let me tell you a little bit about Harrah's, and specifically Gary Loveman, who's a PhD student here at MIT with me. And I think he's actually an exemplar of a new kind of CEO, a new kind of senior executive that we're going to be seeing in more and more companies in the coming years. When Gary first came to Harrah's, Harrah's was frankly a sort of a second tier, also ran casino company. But it did have a great deal of data, most of which was not being used effectively. What Gary did was he brought a culture of experimentation and analytics that has now propelled Harrah's to being the leading casino company. How did Gary do it? Well, one of the things he did was he's really good with numbers. While a lot of Gary's competitors were working on having fancier fountains and more incredible spectacles in Las Vegas, Gary was checking through the numbers to see what was really driving profitability at his casinos. And this kind of analysis is something that he has spread not just from the CEO suite, but all throughout the company. In fact, when he came to speak at my MBA class last year, he told me that there are really two things that could get you fired from Harrah's. One is if they catch you stealing from the company, and the second one is if they catch you running an experiment without a proper control group. This culture of taking experimentation and the proper methods very seriously is something new. I think that first principle about not stealing is probably thousands of years old, but the new principle about running intelligent business experiments is something that we hadn't seen before and something that information technology makes a lot more feasible in all kinds of companies. Harrah's runs dozens of experiments. For instance, they will see whether different kinds of discounts and coupons can entice people to come that normally come for 2 days to come for 3 days, or that normally bet the $5 machines to bet the $25 machines. They also bring this experimentation in terms of their internal workforce to figure out what work practices can get their waiters and waitresses to work more efficiently, to serve customers more effectively and get higher customer satisfaction scores. This is a mentality that they bring to every aspect of their business. Now, to be successful at this experimentation approach, it requires a unique set of skills, one that hasn't been that common among most types of managers, and one that, frankly, we at business schools need to work harder at bringing together. Specifically, knowledge of business analytics, the way to understand the numbers, to drive the statistics, to design intelligent experiments, but also deep knowledge of the business itself, so you know how to ask the right questions. In coming years, I think the real bottleneck will be finding people who combine those sets of skills, who can design experiments that get at genuine business problems in a way that can be analyzed through controlled business experiments. That's something that we don't see a whole lot currently.